July 9th, 2006. Berlin. The Olympic Stadium held more than 69,000 people that night. Millions more watched from living rooms, bars, and street corners across the world. It was the World Cup final. France against Italy. And somewhere in the tunnel, a defender stood quietly. Not the tallest man on the pitch, not the fastest. Certainly not the one the cameras followed. His name was Marco Materazzi. And by the time that night was over, the world would remember him for all the wrong reasons. But this is not the story most people think they know. This is the story of what happened before the tunnel, before the headlines, before the whispers hardened into a verdict that followed one man for the rest of his life. This is the story of a defender who spent the first half of his career being told he wasn't good enough. A man who was called reckless, undisciplined, a liability on the pitch and a problem off it. A man some called a coward, not for lacking bravery, but for lacking control. History remembers the moment. It forgets the minutes before it. Materazzi did not arrive at the 2006 World Cup as a hero. He arrived as a question mark. His reputation had been built on bookings, suspensions, and the kind of tackles that made coaches wince from the stands and fans cover their eyes. At club level, the same pattern repeated. Seasons where his talent was undeniable. Seasons where his temper undid it all. Perugia, Everton, Internazionale, at each stop, the same debate followed him like a shadow. Could you trust him when it mattered most? Could he hold himself together on the biggest stage? At Everton, where he spent a single season in English football, the verdict was swift and largely unkind. Physical, yes. Committed, yes. But the discipline record was a problem that never went away. He returned to Italy. He settled at Internazionale, where he became a regular presence in Serie A. Sometimes brilliant, sometimes impossible. A player who could dominate an opponent with pure positional intelligence one week, then find himself suspended for the next 3 matches. Italy's manager, Marcello Lippi, had seen it all before. He knew exactly what Materazzi was capable of, the good and the bad, in equal measure. Choosing him for the World Cup squad was itself a calculated risk. Some journalists questioned it openly. Why bring a player this volatile to a World Cup? Why stake any part of your defensive structure on someone who might not be there by the 75th minute? Lippi said, little publicly. He trusted what he had seen in training. He trusted the player he believed existed underneath the reputation. The question was whether Materazzi could trust himself. Italy's road to the 2006 final was not smooth. The team arrived in Germany against a backdrop of profound scandal. The Calciopoli match-fixing investigation had torn through Italian football that same year. Clubs facing relegation, officials losing their positions, the fabric of the domestic game visibly fraying. The national team carried that weight with them across the border. Some wondered whether the players could separate the noise from the match. Materazzi felt it more than most. His club, Internazionale, was among the teams placed under scrutiny during the investigation. He played every match, knowing that his name carried extra weight off the pitch as well as on it. And yet game by game, Italy advanced, past Ghana, past the United States, past Australia, Ukraine, and finally through a semi-final that tested every nerve in the squad. Materazzi was not always in the starting lineup. That was the truth of his tournament. He was the backup, the cover, the man called upon when something went wrong elsewhere. It was a role that suited neither his ego nor his ambition, but he accepted it. He trained with the same intensity regardless. He waited. And in the quarterfinal against Australia, he was called upon. Italy were awarded a penalty in the final minutes. Francesco Totti converted it. But in the moments leading up to that decision, Materazzi had been everywhere. Sharp, physical, relentless, making life difficult for every Australian attacker who came near him. He was doing what he always did, making the game uncomfortable for the opponent, grinding down whatever confidence stood across from him. Some called it gamesmanship. Others had less polite words for it. He didn't waste energy on what they called it. He was still standing. That was enough. The evening of July 8th, 2006. The Italy squad gathered in their hotel outside Berlin. Lippi spoke to his players calmly, methodically. He had coached enough high-stakes matches to know that the loudest man in the room rarely settles anyone. He spoke about structure, about discipline, about what France would try to do in the first 15 minutes. Materazzi sat and listened. He had started the semifinal against Germany. He had been part of every defensive session that week, working through set-piece routines, marking assignments, the fine margins that separate organization from chaos in a match at this level. His role was clearly defined, not to be the leader, not to be the voice, but to be the wall, to hold the line when France pressed, to make Thierry Henry's evening as long and difficult as possible. Across the city, France were preparing with the same focus. Zinedine Zidane was in the final weeks of his career. He had announced his retirement before the tournament began. This was his last opportunity. France needed him to lead one final time, to find one last performance that would seal a legacy already beyond question. Materazzi knew Zidane. Every defender in European football knew Zidane. You did not stop him cleanly. You managed him. You made his evening physical, draining, full of small interruptions that accumulated into fatigue. You hoped that over 90 minutes, the weight would eventually slow him down. The morning of July 9th arrived quietly. Neither side had slept particularly well. The stadium waited. The World Cup final began at pace. Zidane scored first, a penalty in the 7th minute, a calm and almost arrogant chip down the center of the goal. The keeper guessed wrong. France led. Then Materazzi equalized. A corner. A run into the box. A header met cleanly, directed into the corner of the net. Materazzi, the man nobody trusted in big moments, had leveled a World Cup final with 19 minutes played. He ran, arms wide, and for a moment, the entire stadium seemed to absorb what had just happened. The man the critics had written off. The man Lippi had been questioned for selecting. The man who had spent a career accumulating doubt instead of praise. He had just scored one of the most important goals his country would ever see. The match tightened after that. Both sides found their shape. Neither could break through. 90 minutes passed without a winner. Extra time began. Fatigue settled into both sets of legs. And then, deep in the 110th minute, the match changed in a way no one had predicted. Materazzi and Zidane were close to each other, away from the ball. Words were exchanged. Nobody outside that moment heard exactly what was said, and the debate over it has never fully resolved. What happened next, the entire world saw. Zidane turned and drove his head into Materazzi's chest. The Italian went down. The referee reached for his pocket. Red card. Zidane walked off the pitch, the greatest player of his generation, leaving his final match, not with a goal, not with a trophy raised above his head, with a red card. The stadium fell into a strange, suspended silence. Then the noise returned, different, confused, disbelieving. Italy held on. Penalties, 5 kicks each. The entire tournament narrowed to a series of single moments. Materazzi stepped forward in the shootout. He scored. Italy won the World Cup. Time seemed to stop. In the days after the final, the world did not celebrate Materazzi. It interrogated him. What had he said? What could provoke a player of Zidane's composure, a man who had spent 2 decades in elite football, absorbing every form of provocation, to throw away the last match of his career? The speculation was immediate, intense, and largely disconnected from fairness. Materazzi was cast as the villain, the instigator, the man who had ruined Zidane's farewell. Columns were written that framed the outcome as a kind of theft. Television panels dissected every available second of footage, searching for evidence that would explain or condemn. FIFA opened an investigation. both players received suspensions. Materazzi eventually acknowledged he had said something provocative. He did not deny it and did not hide behind silence. He also pointed out, with some justification, that verbal exchanges happen in every match, on every pitch, in every league in the world. What made this exchange different was what came after it. And what came after it was Zidane's choice, not his. The nuance was largely ignored. It is easier to name a villain than to sit with complexity. Materazzi became the answer to a trivia question. The man who made Zidane snap. Rarely the man who scored to equalize in a World Cup final. Rarely the man who stepped up in the shootout and didn't miss. He carried that reduction quietly. Over the years, he gave interviews that were measured, self-aware, occasionally direct in a way that surprised people expecting defensiveness. He did not campaign for sympathy. He did not demand a different version of events. He simply refused to disappear. Years passed. Materazzi retired from professional football in 2011. His medal stayed. The World Cup winner's medal from 2006 sits in the same official record as every other Italian who lifted that trophy under the Berlin lights. No asterisk, no footnote qualifying his contribution. He played his part. He scored when it counted. He held his defensive line across a tournament where the entire Italian football system was under siege, where the noise from home was relentless, where the pressure extended far beyond the pitch. He absorbed a headbutt in a World Cup final, one of the most extraordinary and disorienting moments in the history of the sport, and returned to the game minutes later to take a penalty with a nation watching. That takes something, not glamour, not elegance, something harder to name. Resilience, perhaps. Or simply the refusal to be undone by the thing that was supposed to undo him. The history books remember the night Zidane was sent off. They remember France's disbelief and Italy's celebration. They remember the golden trophy raised above heads in a Berlin stadium and the faces of men who had carried their country's chaos across a summer and come out the other side. Fewer people tell the story of the defender underneath all of that, the one Lippi was questioned for selecting. The one who rose highest at a corner in the 19th minute and put Italy level in a World Cup final. The one who stood at the penalty spot in a shootout, under the full weight of the moment, and scored. History remembers the moment. It forgets the minutes before it. You can decide for yourself what kind of player Marco Materazzi was, but you cannot decide what the scoreboard said. Beyond the bench, this is Beyond the Bench.